You know, for almost half a century, a single woman was the real power behind the throne in China. From 1861 all the way to 1908, Empress Dowager Cixi was the one calling the shots for the massive Qing Dynasty, which was China's very last imperial dynasty, and she did it during one of the most chaotic times in its history. I mean, we're talking about one of the most powerful women, period. But how we should remember her? Well, that is hotly debated.
So, what's the real story here? Was Cixi this cruel, power-hungry despot who basically doomed her own empire? Or was she a really smart politician, just trying to hold China together when everything was falling apart? That's the big question we're going to dig into.
And believe me, historians are completely split. For a long time, the story was that she was the villain, a reactionary who stomped out any chance of progress. But lately, scholars are offering a different view, that maybe she was just a convenient scapegoat for huge problems that were way bigger than her, a pragmatic leader just trying to manage an impossible situation. So let's look at the evidence for both sides.
Okay, let's get into how this all happened, because her story is just wild. She didn't start at the top, not even close. It all began with this incredibly calculated climb right from the emperor's harem. So how on earth did a concubine become the most powerful person in China?
It happened with stunning speed. I mean, look at this timeline. In 1852, she walks into the Forbidden City. Just 4 years later, she gives birth to the emperor's only son, which, you can imagine, skyrockets her status. Then, the emperor dies in 1861. Her son, who's only 5, is now the emperor, which makes her an Empress Dowager. And right then, that's when she makes her big move. And this is the moment everything changes. Before he died, the emperor had appointed this council of 8 really powerful regents to rule. Cixi knew they saw her as a threat. So what does she do? She orchestrates this brilliant palace coup. She has the lead regents arrested. One was even executed. And just like that, she seizes power for herself. Now, she was smart. She knew she couldn't pull this off alone. So she teamed up with 2 crucial people, the other Empress Dowager Xian, who was the late emperor's main wife, and Prince Gong, the emperor's super ambitious brother, who the regents had pushed aside. Their support gave her coup the legitimacy and the muscle it needed to work.
And you really have to understand just how radical this was. Qing tradition, set by the Manchu rulers, strictly forbade women from getting involved in politics, period. By taking power, Cixi absolutely shattered that rule. She would now rule from behind the curtains, making all the real decisions for her little boy, the emperor.
All right, so she's got the power. Now what does she do with it? This is where it gets really complex. For the next few decades, her reign is this fascinating, contradictory mix of progress and tradition. You can find actions that support both sides of the argument about who she really was. Okay, this is so interesting, right? It wasn't that she was just for or against modernization. Her one and only goal was to keep the Qing Dynasty alive. So yeah, she supported Western military tech because she needed it to defend the empire. She even broke with tradition by putting Han Chinese commanders in charge, something the Manchu rulers rarely did. But technology that seemed to threaten tradition, like railways that might disturb ancestral tombs, absolutely not. And she famously refused to ride in a car because the driver would have to sit in front of her, and that was a total breach of protocol. No way. Now, if you want the best case for Cixi as a pragmatic leader, you look at the early part of her reign. It's known as the Tongzhi Restoration. At the time, the dynasty was literally about to collapse because of the huge Taiping rebellion. But under her leadership, the government rallied, crushed the rebellion, and stabilized the empire. As historian Mary Wright says here, a civilization that looked totally doomed was brought back from the brink. But what about the other side, the case for Cixi as a ruthless tyrant? Well, this right here tells you a lot. Just look at how she handled anyone who could possibly challenge her. Prince Gong, the guy who made her coup possible, demoted as soon as he got too influential. Her own son, the emperor, when he made bad decisions, she shut him down publicly. And then her nephew, the Guangxu emperor, when he tried to push his own agenda, she was absolutely merciless. This brings us to a huge turning point, maybe the defining event of her later years. In 1898, her nephew, the Guangxu emperor, launched this radical reform program. He wanted to completely modernize China, kind of like Japan and Germany had done. It was a really ambitious plan to try and save the dynasty from being carved up by foreign powers. Cixi saw these reforms as a direct threat, both to her own power and to the entire traditional system. So she acted fast and decisively. With the backing of the conservatives at court, she launched another coup. squashed the reforms, and put the emperor under house arrest. He stayed there for the rest of his life. For a lot of people, this is the ultimate proof that she was a reactionary who held China back.
So after all this conflicting evidence, we're right back where we started. We've seen Cixi the modernizer, and we've seen Cixi the tyrant. So how in the world do we make sense of this complicated legacy?
First, let's just let the sheer length of her reign sink in for a second. 47 years. To put that into perspective, she ruled longer than most of the actual emperors she served. She managed to hold on to power through massive rebellions, foreign wars, constant court intrigue. For nearly half a century, what she said went. So it really all boils down to these two verdicts. The case against her, that she was a power-hungry tyrant who put her own interests first, and that by crushing those 1898 reforms, she hammered the final nail in the Qing Dynasty's coffin. The case for her, that she was a pragmatist in an impossible spot, the only one who could hold the empire together, and was unfairly blamed when it all came crashing down anyway.
And when you look at a photograph like this one, it's one of the few ever taken of her, you can just feel that power. She is the absolute, undisputed center of her universe, projecting this image of unshakable authority, even as the foundations of our empire were literally crumbling beneath her.
And that brings us right back to the central puzzle. Cixi was undeniably brilliant, she was ruthless, and she was incredibly complex. So was her long reign the tragic story of a leader whose fear of change ultimately destroyed an empire? Or was she the only person who could have possibly held it all together for as long as she did? The evidence, as you've seen, can support both sides, leaving the final verdict up for debate.